This is Mikey Mason, and you're listening to Why We Game.
I'm Brodor, and this is Why We Game. My guest today is a man who makes me feel young, Chris Hussey. Chris, I'm not even sure the litany of titles that we can put in your resume as someone who has worked professionally in the game industry. I'm going to start with your most recent project, and I am going to say actual play podcaster who produces podcasts for the Fear the Boot actual play. But you are a longtime Fear the Boot host. You've been in and out of the cast for, since pretty much the beginning. You've done freelance writing, game design, etc. Well, if a professional like yourself were actually conducting this interview, how would you introduce yourself?
I think the pretentious title I would probably give myself would be something like role-playing game journeyman or podcast journeyman, because in addition to Fear the Boot, I've been a guest on a number of other different podcasts. Yep, like you say, I produced the two actual plays as well. I don't know. I think that it's probably a physical manifestation of my undiagnosed ADHD and the amount of things that I just keep throwing myself at, because I'm on streaming shows as well. And I've also, been the instigator for a couple of different ideas and concepts for streaming shows. And so there's so much in relation to this hobby beyond what you do around the table that it's hard to ignore. I want to just be that fat kid who just sticks his fingers in every single pie that's there on Thanksgiving, because it's just that looks good. I'll stick my hand in there. That looks good. I'm going to stick my hand in there. And just to do it, to experience it, and then do it for a little while, and then, for some strange reason, move on to something else.
There's so much to unpack there, right? All right.
Yeah.
I have a sort of a bio baseline, and if you've listened to a few episodes of the show, I have my sort of gamer generation theory, right? So you're 50...
I'm 52.
You're exactly my older brother's age, right? So my older brother, Bob, you two are the same age, right? 6 years older than me. And so I can put my head sort of in your gaming experience. Now, you are middle-aged, Caucasian, originally from the Midwest, I presume.
You couldn't be more right. I'm about as pasty as they come, because I'm not only is that all correct, but I'm also Norwegian and Irish are my predominant nationality backgrounds, and so both extremely white as far as that goes. And grew up in northern Minnesota, so the accent, and I've joked before, and this is actually not a joke, this is true. They've mentioned hot dish many times on Fear the Boot in regards to myself. I legit didn't realize that hot dish as a thing was the exact same thing as casserole until I was in my 20s, So So I'm very, very, very Midwestern white in that sense.
Then you grew up in the height of everything, right? The best and worst time to be a gamer. Because I think now is the best time to be a tabletop gamer, regardless of what your particular facet of the hobby is. But you grew up in the time where it was bad, right? where most of the board games were either going to be things that you got at the toy store, or were they overly complicated shit games, but also with this wild west of role-playing games. How did you first get exposed? And not by your Uncle Steve, but the time to role-playing games.
I'm one of those red box children, without a doubt. I grew up on the basic red box edition, and I was, the Sears wish book was where. So okay, there's two aspects to how I got into this. Saw it in the Sears wish book. I want to say it was for the Christmas of 1983, and I remember looking through there and seeing the images of this box and just being transfixed by this imagery and the descriptions that were written by the copywriter about this game. And I knew about the game before because, and here's kind of the weird part, in 7th grade, I saw there was definitely there was a group of nerds who were into D&D, and you saw them at lunch, and they had the blue graph paper, and they had those original first edition modules that had the maps that were printed in blue, like a blueprint in the inside covers of the adventures. And I would go and try and find out what it was that they were doing, because it looked intriguing, and I would try and ask them, about what it is. And what is this game? What do you guys do? And they wouldn't talk to me about it. I don't know if they were afraid that I was going to make fun of them, or if they just didn't want, I wasn't nerdy enough, but they wouldn't really let me into their circle so I could learn about the game. So I never got to get that level of exposure. I had to wait until I got the red box for Christmas before I actually started to learn how to play this game. And ironically, my neighbor down the street, he also got that for Christmas that year. And so he and I together, we started figuring this out and talking about it and getting all stoked about it. And then we made the other neighbor kid down the road, we forced him to be our DM. And then that was how we actually started playing. We made him learn those rules because we both wanted to play.
That's wonderful and terribly selfish, but I totally get it, right? You just find random guy and conscript him in, you're running the fucking game, right? That's what you're gonna do. Something that I find intriguing is that your initial experience and exposure to the game was not welcoming. And I'm surprised only because I would have assumed that most people's initial exposure to the game was kind of this weird, esoteric, accidental thing, or what I'm saying is that most of the people to whom I've spoken have a very open exposure to the game where a friend or family member was like, dude, this is really cool. Please come check this out. And I'm really surprised to hear that there were guys who were playing it, another person expressed interest, and they kind of shunned you away. I'm really surprised to hear that. Yeah,
and the thing was, I was not a cool kid in high school. I wasn't in that social strata at all. But at the same time, I wasn't like the super sciencey nerds or that stereotypical early 80s definition of a nerd. I wasn't in that group either. I was in that weird floaty zone where I just I knew people from all of these social circles.
So you were in band?
I was in choir. I wouldn't.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I wouldn't be in band. I did not. This is so sad in a lot of ways. I purposely did not join band because I saw how the band kids got picked on the school bus, and I'm like, fuck that. I am not going to get. I'm not going to get picked on that way. So I'll just be in choir. And my dad was a band teacher for decades. I should have been in band. I really should have, but because I feared getting picked on, I wouldn't be in band.
You were so concerned about being picked on, you didn't follow in your father's footsteps and join band in high school, but you did fucking play Dungeons and Dragons. In
right?
1988. So, wow, I feel bad for those band kids. I wouldn't have joined band either. If the D&D kids have it better than the band kids, that's messed up.
Well, because it was such an easier secret to keep because you didn't talk about it. You just didn't, there was no, that's why I only ever saw them doing anything with that at lunch because they all sat at their own table. Obviously, you can't mix social casts in high school. So they were safe at their own table. And that's where you would see the maps and the graph paper and you'd hear them talk about their fighter or their magic user character. And I just was, 7th grade me was just friggin' fascinated by this. What is this? And then our art teacher was cool enough that she had a few, Frank Frazetta paintings on her wall.
Stop it.
And so that was, legitimately the one where the dude's getting pulled by the polar bears. He's got the sled dog with polar bears. That painting was on her wall in class. And that just impacted me so much because that is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my life up to that point.
That's amazing. So did this teacher, was she a gamer?
You know what? Okay, I don't know if she was a gamer. I know that she was an 80s high school art teacher, so I'm sure there was probably all kinds of things that she did that, we just were never aware of. But we did have a teacher, it was one of the science teachers, and he was one of the cool science teachers. He was a gamer, and I knew he was a gamer because he had a model he had the action figure of Tiamat. I saw it in his classroom one time, and this was a few years later in high school after I'd been playing for a while, but we discovered that he was a gamer, and we wanted to try and game with him. Like let's sit down and we'll play a game together. And he really wanted to, and I guess this is probably the most extreme example of satanic panic that I ever got exposed to in that era, was he didn't, because he said, I don't think it's appropriate because of the reputation that the game has, and also a little bit of the whole, teacher doing things outside of class with students at the time, even though it would have been all dudes, but again, then too, it's also the mid 80s. And so being gay was also a sin as well at that point in time. Not that I even knew if anybody was, but the implication would have been there. So we never did. And it's really sad, because I would have loved to have gamed with someone so much older than me just to get a different perspective. Like, how does this 30s, age dude, how does he look at D&D? I know how I looked at it at my age at the time, but how does he look at it? I never got to experience that.
I want to go back to, it's just you and your buddy. It's 83. You both got the red box. You conscript your third friend, a dungeon master to run the game. Was it just the three of you initially, or did you wrangle other kids in the neighborhood?
Initially, it was just the three of us. I mean, we lived out in the sticks, so it was just the three of us. There were other neighbor kids, but we weren't going to game with them at that time just because of there was some friction, and so we just kind of avoided that. But it was the three of us for a while, and then because my friend Shane, he was the neighbor who also got the red box. He was about 2 years older than I was. He had a car, he had a job, he was able to find other people, and that was kind of how more people got into our group. My friend Scott, and ironically, Scott came into the group a little bit later, and he's the only one who I still interact with after all these years, and even now still game with every once in a while. But he joined the group, and then some of us were able to go and get in with some of Shane's other friends and game with them. But then that too also got a little cliquish, where sometimes some of us were not invited to some of those games, which, it happens in every group. And so it was bound to happen in something like that. But we as a group, that core initial group, we stayed together up until I moved away, and more people kept, in and out, but there was always some aspect of that core that was still there throughout the 17 plus years that we did that.
I have to admit that I have been a shitty cliquish gamer oftentimes in my life, for sure.
Oh,
I'm not proud of it, but it is behavior in which I've engaged.
It does happen, man. It happens, you know.
Yeah, people suck. Just in general, we're crappy.
They do, and they don't communicate properly, or they'll get offended too easily or whatever. So yeah, there's always issues.
That's the thing that people don't get about the origin of the hobby, the fragile nature of the people that birthed it. Right? You're talking about people who are generally smart, above average intelligence, who are generally going to be educated or at least well-read, often well-spoken, who are marginalized and often uncomfortable with conflict, right? Because especially at a time where people were much more physical, and it was much more acceptable to respond physically and beat up and bully and abuse other people. And I say this as somebody who went to school with bruises and scrapes from being beaten at home by my parent, right? So it was just a different fucking time, right? So if you were smarter than other people and you could make them feel shitty and frustrated and they were bigger than you, they would just beat you up. That was just life, right?
Yep. That was the life and the plot of many a movie of that era as well.
Yeah,
so it's reinforcing that horrible behavior.
Right. And so you have this group of people who just they're already marginalized. They find other people like themselves. It's no wonder that they're cliquish and isolationist and afraid to let people in because they're tired of being hurt by people. I get the apprehension. I don't think it's right, and I certainly am glad that the hobby has evolved, but I don't think people really understand how the whole thing got started and are not sympathetic to its origins. But I think a lot of that has to do with just politics in today's world, and I don't want to get into that because that's not what the show's about. Let me shut up and give the floor back to you. It's just the three of you gaming. Your buddy's got a car. Your group starts expanding. I assume that you take gaming with you to college.
Absolutely. And I get into college, and I'm doing some gaming with our group, but our original group. But time marches on and things change. But in college, I learned. I think it was around in college. That was when I shed my gamer shame, that quote unquote gamer shame. And I wasn't afraid of being a theater major. I think that made it a little bit easier to do that kind of thing.
Oh shit! I could have guessed that. Yeah, for sure. I should have already thrown that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you get in this vibe of, it's okay to be who you are and do what you want to do. And so, I kind of learned to shed that really easy. And I was able to get people in my dorm to start playing D&D. In fact, even more so, I got 3 other guys to game. They were all Phi Ed majors, and they played. And yep, they had a certain style. They had a certain way to approach the game that was very stereotypically would be assigned to them. If you they're Phi Ed majors, I bet they probably wanted to play fighters. Yep, that's exactly. They all wanted to play fighters, except for one dude who decided to play a fighter thief combo. So he wasn't straying too far, but they enjoyed it. They had a great time, and we kind of developed our own style of gaming, but they were very much into it. And these were guys who probably never would have really gotten into gaming because they were the ones who like to just sit around the weekends and drink out of a case of Old Milwaukee and maybe play Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. That was the extent of what they'd want to do. But once I introduced them to D&D, they kind of really got into it and I think really appreciated it. And they actually even role played to a certain extent, which was pretty good. I was pretty happy with.
I'm going to assume the answer to this question is no, but have you in gaming ever broken up? Have you guys ever taken a break?
If I ever took a break, it was probably a forced break because of life circumstances. So there's never been a time when I was like, I'm done gaming and walked away from it. And even those times when it was life circumstances, I was still associated with the hobby. I moved away in the early 90s to Illinois for a job. And so didn't have any friends, didn't have anybody to game with. But at the same time, the job that I went down there for, I was working for a hobby distributor. So I was selling role-playing games to, in front of the local game stores. Yeah.
Which hobby distributor?
Windmill Hobbies.
I am unfamiliar with them, so I don't know if they're around anymore.
That's because they went, and if I had been smarter and done my research, but I was a fucking idiot who was attracted by the fact that the job offered me at the time 3 times more than what I was making, but yet don't let that deceive you. It still was not a lot of money, for the time. If I had done my research, I would have realized that they were a failing business when I went in there. And approximately 6 months after I got fired for no reason whatsoever, they went under. And so, they were out of business. But yeah, so when I was there, I was selling gaming product. And then during my lunchtime, me and another account exec, we would go back in the warehouse and play Magic the Gathering because that was when Magic was coming out.
Oh my gosh,
right at the time. So that's when,
early 90s.
Yes. Yeah. And this was when Magic was exploding. And so we're like, what the hell is this game? And then I learned it and I'm like, holy shit, this game's awesome. Let's take our lunch breaks and let's go play. Then we would just call it like we're doing product research or whatever. Even though I wasn't sitting around the table rolling dice, I was still exposed and involved in gaming. And that was also when I had the opportunity to become the FASA Battletech line developer and then failed at that.
Okay. Well, this was back when FASA had Battletech, or I should say, because wasn't it, Battletech was originally a FASA creation, correct?
Correct. Yes.
how long had Battletech been out before you got the gig as the line developer?
Oh boy, let's see. Well, the game came out in the, I think, late 80s, because that was when I was introduced to it. Shane, he was one of the times he's like, hey, you got to try this game. And so he and I played it, and it was like, wow, giant battle machine combat. This is so cool. And I read through the book, and it was like, this game's awesome. That was the game that broke us away from D&D, by the way, because our group was like, it's D&D and that's it, screw everything else. But then we started playing Battletech, and then that became the game that we played for a long time.
The moment you realized you could put your heat sinks in your legs and your Warhammer could walk into the lake and just start drilling fools with PPCs.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it was even more so when I realized, I can take my Griffin mech and I can like modify that mech and I can have it like uproot a tree and use it as a club. Hell yeah. Let's
so great. What, my Locust just leapt off of the hill and now it's going to try to crash into this guy's upper torso? Asinine, ridiculous stuff.
But Battletech was the game that just made me really just fall in love with role-playing games in a way in which no other game had, and I owe a lot of credit to Stackpole's novels with that, because he made that universe come alive, and I began to see some of the potential that was in this game and with everything that was going on. And that was what motivated me to actually start writing and start submitting ideas and pitches, because I had done some before. If you remember the old Dungeon magazine where you would just submit adventures for, 1E or 2E.
I do, and I am truly brokenhearted that you had to frame your question in that fashion. I don't know if you remember. It makes me sad that those days of gaming are gone, but
it is, because a Dungeon particularly, I mean, Dragon Magazine was awesome, but Dungeon Magazine itself was the concept of it was just fantastic, in the sense that I have a magazine filled with like 6 different adventures of a variety of levels. And a lot of it was so good. And I had submitted a couple ideas. They got rejected. But then I submitted a pitch for a product for Battletech. And that one, it's funny. It's those things that you remember. And I still remember where I was when I got the call about that thing getting accepted. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be published, and I'm going to be a published freaking game product. And then it just kind of went from there. And so I had, but getting back to your original question about the whole line development thing. So yeah, I was working in Illinois, and I had done a few projects. So I was established. The people there knew me, or at least knew my name. And then the line developer position came open at FASA. And I thought, I gotta try, what the hell? I mean, I have nothing to lose. So I submitted, I don't even know if I remember submitting my resume, but I submitted something that got me a chance to go into their headquarters to interview. I sat down with Sam Lewis, who was president of the company at the time, interview with him. They had you take a test to check your lore knowledge. And then you talked to a few other people. I went out for lunch with Tom Dowd and somebody else. Diane Gelman, I think it might have been. And yeah, it was a good experience. But then I found out a couple weeks later that I didn't get the job. So I was like this close. And I had made a few good points. In fact, they even commented on the fact like, oh, hey, you caught an error in our little continuity test that even we missed. And I was like, hell yeah.
That's
but it
wonderful.
Still wasn't good enough to get the job, And then I remember finding out when at one point my wife's parents had come down to visit us. And that was when I found out that I didn't get the job. We went out to dinner, but we had to take separate cars or whatever. And in the car, I cried like a freaking baby because I didn't get the job. You know what I mean? And I said, please just don't talk to this about our parents. Let's enjoy the time when they're down here. We can worry about this later. I'm just, kind of bummed I didn't get the job. But yeah, so I mean, and honestly, 2020 hindsight, looking back at it, it's probably a good thing I didn't get the job. For as much as I love the universe and the game, and I was getting my product ideas or my book ideas were getting accepted. I didn't have the knowledge to properly manage a game line. I would have failed at the job. I know now I would have failed at that job. So it was much better that Brian Nystall got the job than me. And it came down to him and I, apparently. And he deserved it, for sure, because he managed it really well for a number of years.
So what precisely is the function of an RPG's line manager? In my head canon, I'm envisioning it like a showrunner for a television show.
Yeah, and I think that's really, at least in the 90s, that's basically how it was. You laid out the schedule, I'm sure in coordination with the company as a whole, but you laid out the schedule for, here's the products, here's the authors we have attached to them, here's their deadlines. In Battletech's case, here's how we're handling, using these products to handle and accelerate or move forward the flow of the story universe in conjunction with these novels that are going to be coming out around this time as well. So yeah, it's all, and then also too, I'm sure that there was, because there were small staff, I'm sure there's plenty of product proofreading before getting it sent on to editing, for those fixes as well, just to make sure that stuff was in line and in continuity with what was happening or what was supposed to happen with that. Yeah. So yeah, a showrunner, I think, is a really apt description or apt analogy for that.
So you didn't get the gig I
didn't get the gig, no.
But you continued to do work for FASA.
I did. In a strange flash of maturity on my part, at that time, I continued to be a freelancer and working with the guy who, beat me for the job and working very well. I like Brian as a person. He was great. And I continued to get projects, either solo projects or collaborative projects. I did get a reputation for being someone who could pinch hit in a crisis sort of situation. After the failed experiment of living in Illinois and getting fired from the hobby distributor job and coming back up and was living with my parents at the time, or we were living with our parents because I was married and we had 2 kids at that time. I remember getting a call one night from Brian. He's like, hey, we have this project coming up. This one author, he kind of flaked. He has a little bit of stuff written about this. Do you think that you could fill in and take it, and run with it and meet this deadline? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? And I was able to do so. And then, so that kind of stuff, allowed me to continue to get work, cause I think back then the ability to meet deadlines and communicate with them, communicate with the companies that you're working for was oftentimes more valued than your skill as a writer. And this is not to say that I was a shitty writer. I mean, everybody is shitty to a certain extent, but because I communicated when things were good and I communicated when things were not good, they appreciate that because then it helps them on their end manage things better, making adjustments here and there when needed or helping you when needed, that kind of thing. And so that just helped, increase my reputation and allowed me to, got me some work in Shadowrun, as well. And, and other things too. So it helps, you word of mouth does a lot. Which
Shadowrun edition? Like I think instead of Shadowrun having edition numbers, they just have a consistently reducing number of D6s by weight. So like first edition Shadowrun should be like Shadowrun 3.2 pounds. And then that's the average number of D6 that you're going to roll So you did work for which edition?
I think I was writing around, I want to say it was 3rd edition time.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was, the era when, they had the whole Dunkelzahn running for president plot line and all that. And, all the stuff kind of going along with that. That was back when, well, of course, Mike Mulvihill, I think, ran that line for, the entire time that I did writing for him. Yeah. That was also, strangely enough, working with FASA was the one time, or was the thing that made me stop. You talk about walking away from just RPGs. I walked away from RPG writing for a number of years after some extremely brutal feedback to an idea that I had for an adventure, Shadowrun adventure that I had written, which was also accurate feedback as well. Again, hindsight, realize they were so right.
Give us a synopsis of the adventure, and what was their feedback?
the adventure did get published, and I can't remember what it was called, but it is in a product. But it has to do with there was a product they published called, it was for Dunkelzahn's Will, and there was all like, it basically was this huge book of plot threads. I love that book tremendously, and one of the plot threads that I pitched in there had to do with finding these photos from a Mars probe that had landed on Mars but had found bones on Mars. And like a large thing of bones, almost looked like maybe it might have been a dragon skeleton. Well, I wrote an adventure based around that. This was kind of my idea, this adventure. And I wrote the adventure based around that. And the adventure was so convoluted and things happening for no reason whatsoever. It made very little sense. And I knew at the time I was kind of struggling with it, but I kind of pushed myself through. And this is probably a time when I should have communicated more, but didn't. It just became this hot mess of an adventure. And Mike Mulvihill, the developer at the time, he had sent me a letter because, email was still spotty at this time. And he said, we're not going to go forward with this. He says, but because I know you, I like you, I'm sending you the feedback that our reader gave on this. And I think you should really take a look at it and really try and take it hard. I'm not sending this to you to be mean to you. I'm sending this to you to help you. And I was reading through the feedback, and yeah, it was just brutal. Probably some of the worst stuff ever said about my writing at any point in time. And I know I've still got it somewhere. I scanned it off because it was a really good lesson learned. I read it, and I just thought at the time it shook my confidence at the time as far as a writer. And I just kind of stepped away from doing anything for a while. I just thought, I don't think I can do this for a while.
At that point, you had a lot of work already under your belt.
Yeah. And I'm sure had I just continued on, resubmitted some stuff, stayed active, I would have continued to get work. But I think I let that stuff get to me in the wrong way. So it's not his fault he sent it to me. I mean, he sent it with the right intentions. This was all on me and how I took it. And I didn't take it as the education that it was meant to be. And so I didn't really get back into things until after the D20 explosion, around 2000 or so. And this feedback came around 96, 97, I want to say. So it kicked me out of there for a few years, but it was worth it because it did help me realize at the time some of the shortcomings I have, and it, in the long-term way, propelled me to be better.
Where else in your career then have you had to develop sort of a thick skin? I must assume that rejection is very common. It's just a normal part of the profession.
Yeah. And that was the other thing too, is that my real life circumstances were also changing at the time, in that my careers was evolving. And so I was doing a lot of writing, a lot of script writing, 30-second spots, 15-second spots, that kind of thing. So you're going to get a lot of feedback on your writing at the time. And so that in the feedback is not necessarily, so it became much more constructive feedback than rejection, because you still have to get this 30-second script written. So you have to make some changes. You can't just somebody just can't toss it out. They're they would say things, I like this, but I don't like this, or this is, you've got this word repeating way too many times, that kind of thing. And so I continued to stay writing, and getting better at that, which then led to kind of a reinvigoration of confidence in regards to writing for RPGs. And I think parallel with that, that was when I kind of started to really realize that I preferred GMing over being a player. And so when you're spending time constructing campaigns and adventures, you're teaching yourself a little bit of story structure, how to run things, how to flow things, and you're getting ideas from your players that you didn't think of in regards to what you wrote. Okay, they're going to start in point A, they're going to get to point B, and then they're going to go to point C. And then you actually present that to your players, and all of a sudden, we're going to go to point A1, and then we're going to go over to point B3, and then we're going to circle back around to B. And you're like, wow, that's so much better than what I thought. And then you realize that stories can just be built in a better way if you start thinking about it in different angles.
No, I totally get that. Well, the magic about game mastering is, the story is sort of and as douchey as it sounds, the story is sort of a living, breathing thing that everybody's contributing to. And in that interview with Dan I did recently, he said something that I think is probably the most brilliant role-playing advice I've ever heard. And that is that your game is a road trip. It's not a railroad. It's a road trip. And that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of exits, a lot of detours. We're going to get flat tires. The car's going to break down. We're going to have issues. And the players are going to want to dictate which exits we get off at and what restaurants we eat at. And you need to give them that control. And so I think as long as you're paving road just ahead of them, I think you're good, man. I don't need to know the destination. I just need to have road paved ahead of you. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that's a very apt analogy. I think it's very accurate. And, now in my, in recent years, especially now with the actual plays and in the games that I have made, and done with the group that I had in Iowa, I always approach sitting down at the table or sitting down for a game session with, and this is very similar to what Dan said, with the mentality of, I can't wait to see how my players take what I have written and make it better. I've got this core idea and I'm feeling pretty good about what this idea is. But when I see how they take it and then interact with it and make it something that I didn't realize it could be, that's where the real collaboration comes in for me. And then it just becomes a great experience.
That's where I'm a shitty game master and a bad friend, because I will start writing a game. And I no longer write a game in a vacuum in terms of doing a strict outline. I just do a very healthy, probably bloated, what's really going on series of documents. And I sit down at the table and I think, okay, how can I mitigate the damage that my friends are going to do to my genius? And it's terrible, right? I mean, it's absolutely a horrible, negative, wrong way of looking at it. And yours is so good and positive.
I try to be that way because it's, trying to do the railroad, and I fully admit that I've done this in the past, trying to do the railroad thing, and forcing a path on the players just ends up being not a good experience in the sense that you're never going to get from them what you envisioned in your mind. You're just not, you're envisioning this beautiful scene of how this is going to play out because they're going to do this and this and this. And none of those guys ever do that. And you're like, what the fuck? But it's the whole idea of learning to embrace that chaos or, just leaning into that and then going with it. And sometimes you stumble and you're sent scrambling to try and figure out, okay, how am I going to deal with this curveball? I have no idea. But sometimes the ideas just pop into your head and then you go with it and it makes it seem like that's what you intended the entire time.
So what is it that kept you gaming, right? When you fall in love with someone, you have that, you have all of those emotions and lust and hormones and all this stuff, but anybody who's been in a relatively long-term relationship knows that fades, right? So I know that the titillating blue maps and the secrecy of it and the advertisement and the fucking catalog. You got your goddamn D&D game because you saw it. It's amazing to me. The history is amazing to me, but you fall in love, but that's not why you stayed. And you've stayed with it all these years to the point to consistently pursue it professionally and as art. Why do you stay? What is it?
Despite what would appear to be the repetitive nature of what you're doing each and every session that you sit down at, it just never got boring. It just never got boring. And I don't know if it was because the people that you gained with changed, and so they brought new perspectives. Maybe it's some of that. Or the story varied a little bit. I mean, because how many friggin' D&D sessions or fantasy genre sessions have I sat in over 7 years of gaming? Hundreds. There's got to be so many similarities between so many of these things, but yet each and every one of them was great and I had a good time and weird, funky things happened. And just the the memories generated it just kind of continues, and it hits you in that dopamine sector of your brain every single time, and it just feels good. And yeah, I think it just never got boring. I mean, I guess that's really just the short answer. And it still has yet to. And in fact, now you talk about now being like the best time to be a gamer. Yeah, I think I'm having more fun now than I had in the first 15, 20 years of my gaming. Like the experiences I'm getting, the feedback I'm getting, the interactions I'm getting, the size of the community and the people I get to interact with online, all of that, the heroin just keeps coming in, man. And it without the bad effects of it, you just feel good. There's a story I like to tell that, and I think it scratches a creative itch for me as well. I went to school as a theater major, and I didn't make that come to a realization in regards to I never became a famous actor. But yet I still had the desire to create. I have that inborn need to create, which is probably why I've done so many different other things within RPGs, because it has become this great space to create in. And it doesn't matter to me how successful or unsuccessful it is that it happened. I still get to create it. And so it just, year in and year out, it continues to satisfy and scratch that creative itch for me. It's fantastic. So wait, I'm sorry. There was a story I was going to tell here.
Please,
in regards to this too. And I think this is also goes back to the not getting boring for me. I remember distinctly, I was running a game session for my oldest son and some of his buddies, and they were still in high school. He was probably a junior in high school. And their RPG experience up to that time had been just simply Oblivion, Elder Scrolls. They play on the Xbox. And so, which I've never played. But I mean, I've watched them play it, and I've seen it played. So, I kind of get the gist of what it was. But when I was running a session for them, and I remember the look on their faces when one of the players, one of my son's buddies, he realized that there were more than 3 rote questions that he could ask that innkeeper. Like, he could just talk to this guy and have a conversation with the innkeeper, and the innkeeper would start bitching about his wife, or the fact that the merchant didn't come by with his shipment of lamb or vegetables or whatever. And they would just like have this conversation. He realized that he could do that. Like the world suddenly opened up to him, that there was more than just these 3 or 4 choices that he was allowed to make. He could make any choice he wanted. That reinvigorated me into how amazing this hobby is, that in the sense that for as sexy as those video games look and as gorgeous as they are, and just the visuals that they have, they've yet to replicate and best the interaction that you can get in real life or around a table. They can't do it, or they couldn't do it, at least at that time. That fascinates me, to see them realize that.
I want to transition then.
Okay, good.
I would like to start talking about your actual plays and kind of get into that. But before I do, you had stated earlier when we were speaking that you had taken that break. You'd gotten some pretty brutal yet fair critique, and you'd kind of taken a break until the D20 boom, and then you came back to do some freelance work for D20. But you've also done some game design. And you've done some Kickstarter projects, is that right?
Yeah, the extent of my game design beyond like tinkering with my own personal system, which never got published, was I was involved in some of the design aspects for MechWarrior 3rd Edition, the role-playing game, in the sense that there was a number of us there, and there was a lot of discussion in regards to mechanics, how we're going to do this, how we're going to handle this. And I believe, if memory serves correct, and I apologize to anybody else who's in the group who are like, no, I did that. I think I was the strongest advocator, or the person who advocated the most for maintaining the attribute of edge that was in 2nd edition as a carryover, and making sure that mechanic and how it all worked stayed in the game as it transitioned to the new edition. I don't think beyond that, I don't think there's been anything that I've designed specifically. I mean, there's certainly within when I was writing for Battletech, there was stuff that I created rules-wise that were used in the Chaos March supplement book, which I'm very lucky to be able to be the solo author on. LRM infantry, which was something that didn't exist at that time. I was able to design the rules for that and how that played out. Because most of like your infantry, they just fired SRMs, short-range missiles. But having a platoon of infantry that could shoot long-range missiles, how the damage profile is for that, and the breakdown, that was something that I did. But no, any other type of design beyond that, I mean, that's been about the extent of what I've done. The Kickstarters. I have two failed ones. One failed spectacularly. The other one came up about $400 short.
Why did you not take $400 out of your wallet or your credit card or whatever and just fund it?
You know what? I knew you were going to ask me that question. And the real reason was, and I knew that was like a strategy at the time, like, because I think I remember hearing Ryan Dancy say, look, if you're like within $500 and your Kickstarter's not going to make it, you damn well better take your own money and finish that thing.
Right.
I didn't want to do that because, one, probably my wife would have probably killed me, but also because I wanted it to succeed on its own. I wanted enough people to truly believe in it to get me over that level. I believed in it. I knew that I was going to deliver. I wanted everyone else to believe with me and get it over that level. And it didn't.
Let's take them in the opposite order then. The one that barely failed, that you did not fund, what was that project?
I produced a year or so prior. I had produced I think about a 6-episode RPG comedy audio series called Gamers Behaving Badly. And you could still find it on YouTube. And I got a bunch of people to volunteer their time, including Mikey Mason, a couple other people that I knew at the time, to volunteer their voice. And they all had pretty decent recording equipment. And I had them all record their lines remotely, and then I edited it all together, and it was a 6-episode series. I wrote all the scripts for it, and I would like to say that, yes, it was kind of funny. There's probably some parts that, fall flat. I mean, you can go back and look at it and overanalyze it and all that. But anyway, so I wanted to do a second season. I thought for sure I've got my first season here. The response was pretty good. So I want to do a second season, but I want to pay my actors. I want to pay my voice actors. And that was like literally all I wanted the money for, was to pay the voice actors and maybe to purchase a little bit better editing software. So the funding goal was very low. And I think now if I was to do it, I think that it would succeed. But my voice in that space wasn't loud or large enough at the time to get that funding over that level. And so I pushed it, I attempted, I talked about it, I'm tweeting about it, I'm Facebooking about it, all the other shit. And it just came up short. And so I didn't want to lean on them again for a second season for free. And so I never did it, and so I just kind of left it there. The hitch or the kind of the hook for this is that each episode was based on a true gaming story. So, and then obviously you take various creative liberties with that story so you can make it funny or you can do whatever you want with it. But that was like the hook, is that each episode was based on a real story, based on a true story, which kind of relates to the first Kickstarter, which was a much grander idea based around the similar concept. You take true gaming stories and you turn it into a live action web series. So this involved like actual actors, and of course there would have been script writing, there would have been cameras, all of this stuff. And that one didn't even get close, but that's okay. I'm glad I did it and it failed, as opposed to never doing it and then not knowing.
Well, sure. What's the cliche? You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I mean, I'm so paralyzed by fear that it prevents me from producing content because I'm so fucking fragile, right? And I just think that I can't look at critique or criticism unless it comes from someone in my most intimate inner circle, because it'll fucking destroy me. It just will. Right. I'm just such a bitch.
Yeah, it's hard, man. I mean, I sit here and talk about, here's how it helped me and stuff. But for a lot of people, it's not that way. It can be really brutal to hear any sort of criticism in regards to no matter what it is, Yeah, it's tough. I get it. fully understand that.
And yet you continue to, even to this day, produce role-playing game content that you make available to an audience for free. And I'm referring, of course, to Gun for Hire. That's gun with two N's, which is your Deadlands Noir actual play that you're doing. And then you have The Adventures of Young and Holt, which is your Deadlands Weird West actual play that you produce. Both of which have, if you'll forgive, as I'm not trying to distill it down and make it sound too simple, but they have similar formats in that you have essentially a narrator or host of the show who does the introduction of the show and basically gets the audience caught up. And then you have the actual play that you do during the actual playing of the game, and you run some music and score and stuff sort of low behind that. And then you do an outro. So you've got these cool bookends that you've done in character of your narrator for each actual play, which is really, I think, an interesting way of doing it. But the amount of time that goes into producing these has to be staggering.
It does take a little bit of time, no doubt about it. But for me, it's worth it. One, because I believe in it, and Brad and Brent, who are in both shows, and then Brent's wife Jill is also in Gun for Hire, and my friend Scott, who I mentioned earlier, he was in Gun for Hire for a while as well. They do such a good job, and they've taught me so much as players in regards to helping me improve myself as a GM that I really like the role playing that they do, and they help make that story much better in what they in what they bring to the table. And so, I think that it's quality content in that way. And so by adding the extra production value there, it makes it much more listenable in that sense. I mean, I think that if I released it as a raw, I think that people would still listen. But I think the production values help a lot. It is a little bit of flash, and it is a little bit extra glitz, and it does make the experience not 100% authentic, because so many of the pauses are, taken out, or the breaks or whatever. And also I have a tendency, and I'm sure I've already done it several times over the course of the interview, to either talk fast or stutter, and removing that aspect of it, it's making the experience better for the listener. And also, actually, and this is just a side note, recording yourself, whether you release it as a podcast or not, I think is an essential exercise for every game master. It has improved bad habits in my speech in ways that are just almost, continue to this day.
I could not agree with you more there in terms of speech patterns. And I can say certainly that from doing audio editing, recording this podcast has changed my cadence of speech, how quickly I speak, how I enunciate, but also recording yourself game mastering is the most brilliant way to take notes. And you're right. Yeah. You will find that you have these little annoyances or tics that you do that have to absolutely bug the shit out of other people. And you will learn that they bug the shit out of you too.
Yeah. And it's beyond the ums and ahs. Everybody does that, and that certainly is one thing, but it's the cadence. It's the use of certain words that you realize are redundant or make no sense whatsoever. The one I like to point out all the time is the phrase kind of. I realized very quickly as I'm running games, I would say things like, well, he kind of raises his hand and points his gun at you. And I think, no, he didn't, you stupid fucker. He raises his hand and points his gun at you. He doesn't kind of do it. He did it, like learn to talk. So and it does. It helps do that. And, I just did it. In regards to the ums and ahs, it has allowed me to realize when one is about to come up. And instead of filling that space with an or an ah, being comfortable with the silence until you find what it is that you want to say, and then say it, and it's okay to be silent while you're figuring out what it is you're going to say. It's a hard habit to correct. And in fact, I even did an in that sentence, but it's something that is just a continual thing you work on.
Yeah. For me, it's as if I'm afraid if I don't say the or the or vocalize, then I'm going to lose control of the conversation and somebody's going to jump in. And when you're on a show like Fear the Boot, you have to fight to get mic time. So it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's even tougher when you're not in the room trying to fight for mic time.
Right, which I can't, and that's something that we talked about a little bit before the recording, was doing gaming digitally, right? Even when you're on Fear the Boot, you have to do so remotely, which has a variety of unique challenges, just doing a conversation that's purely audio. But producing your actual plays and doing it digitally in the pandemic has to be an insufferable pain in the ass. And you surprised me by saying that you think that your audio quality has improved by going to a digital format. Really?
Yeah, it did. And the reason why it did is when we started with Young and Holt, the whole idea of the making it as a podcast started as a lark. So equipment wise, it wasn't there. I borrowed a Zoom 400 from work and would position it somewhere as close to the middle of the table as I could possibly get, but it still picked up the background hiss. And we're playing in Brad's basement, and during the wintertime, especially when it was cold in Iowa, the furnace would kick on. And so you have that you're competing with as well. And so it made some of those earlier episodes really a challenge. And my audio editing skills at the time were also not where they are now. So it made even more of a challenge for it to be something that didn't drive you crazy while you're listening to. So at the same time, though, when we went remote and we all had our own microphones, the audio quality improved significantly. That is for sure. But I think in a lot of ways, too, once we learned how to adapt between the three of us or the four of us or even the five of us in case of Gun for Hire when we had a larger cast, you learn how to game online. And I learn as a GM to, here's when I'm done with the exposition, so I'll stop talking now, to allow them to say something. And we do still step on each other, but it's not nearly what it was like when we started. If everyone is invested in what they're doing and in character and the story is making sense, it is easy to stay focused and in character, basically. And yeah, it's not the same as doing it around the table. I mean, that is a dynamic that I think is irreplaceable. It just is. I mean, short of having everyone here in holographic projections, in full real time and everything, you're never going to replace that. And I miss those guys, and I wish I would still be able to sit around the table with them with, a really proper mic setup. But at the same time, the show and the product that we've delivered has improved with us being remote, I think, in a lot of ways.
Your two actual plays are both Deadlands products, which are Pinnacle Entertainment, using the Savage Worlds core rules, and then the Deadlands, whether it's Weird West or the Deadlands Noir. You're using another publisher's intellectual property to produce your game. What kind of hassles do you run into with that? For example, I noticed at the beginning and the end of your show, you do your credits and disclaimers, and at the end you talk about something that basically say, hey, this information is part of a, et cetera, something or other network, yada, 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 media thingamadoodle. What is that? Why is it necessary? And how do you keep from getting in trouble?
In the earlier episodes, there was, I'll back up slightly on this, the impression that I got from listening to other APs which use other IPs, as long as you gave them proper credit and you differentiated what was what, you're good to go. At some point, and this is a Pinnacle thing, they modified, Pinnacle was actually very good in regards to, they had like a fan product license, and they had a couple of other different licenses that were available. And so we were falling under the fan product license in that sense. So what we would do, because we obviously couldn't, being an audio product, we couldn't put the specific logo they wanted on the audio product. But what we could do was the cover image for each of those individual episodes, we could stick that little fan product license on there, which we did. That was what was asked of us they didn't reach out to us and said, please do this. It was just on their website. But then at some point, a couple years ago, they changed their licensing structure, and then this became a media network license in that sense. So it's an unofficial Pinnacle related thing, and the requirement was, here's the network license. You need to either state this somewhere, or it needs to be printed somewhere in your product. That was the nature of the license. And so that's why at the end of both shows, you'll hear that reiterated on there. And I'm not going to drop any names, but I have noticed some other Savage World podcasts that don't necessarily do that. But at the same time, I say that in a joking sense because they're all very good people at Pinnacle, and they're great to talk to, they're easy to get along with. Nobody's gotten in trouble in regards to that. Nobody has said, whoa, what the heck did you guys do? You can't associate our name with this product. That has not ever happened.
But you're also not monetizing the APs, correct? They're both available for free.
That is correct. There is which is part of the reason I think why, and this is true for both, but it's more so I think for Gun for Hire, because I think Gun for Hire, I think it averages a little bit better listenership than Young and Holt. That's been critical to, I think, the success in regards to the music that we use, because it's non-commercial. Yeah, I get nothing. The cast gets nothing from this. It is freely available. There's no paywall. When I approach musicians, artists, and bands, and I explain to them, say, hey, I've discovered your music. I really, really like it. I produce a non-commercial, and I'm very, very emphatic about that fact, podcast, an actual play podcast. If you don't know what this is, here's an explanation of what it is. Here's a website where we have existing episodes. I would love to be able to use your music. I will gladly buy your album. I'll even buy it for more than what you're asking for. And in exchange, I'll make sure in the blog post, I'll give you credit, and I will try and tag you on social media if you have social media accounts where I function in, and you can do that. I have had more success than failure in regards to artists as I've reached out to them for this, particularly on Gun for Hire, in the sense that I seek out a lot of these guys, and these are almost the time these artists come from Bandcamp, and they retain the full rights to their music. So there's no like Creative Commons 3.0 or anything like that going on there. And they're very open to it. They're very happy, I think, to have their music get more exposure. I've communicated profusely with the guy who provides the intro theme music for the current episodes of Young and Holt. Half Deaf Clatch is his artist's name. He's great. He has been a true pleasure to work with. He has been very supportive of us using his music. He retweets the podcast tweets that I do out for Young and Holt. It's great. The cooperation is there, and I think being non-commercial has a lot to do with that.
If you're non-commercial, can you still make money on the product through things like Patreon? So you can say, there's no paywall. You can listen to my AP as much as you want, but still have a Patreon collecting money so you continue to produce.
I don't know about the actual legality of that, but I know that if I was to do something, if I was to go and do my own Patreon, in regards to that, I probably would not pursue that sort of angle. You know what I mean? Right. I would go through legitimate licensing avenues in that regard. So like, for example, I do have a subscription to a music and sound effects library. And so if there is certain tracks or sound effects that I use in those podcasts, I don't list those ones in the show notes. I paid for those. I have the rights for those. I don't feel the obligation to do that. If I was to do something that was behind a paywall, I would have to make sure that I only used those things that I have paid for and have the proper rights to, or it was something that was a Creative Commons 0 or something like that I found. I wouldn't want to try and use, unless the licensing for these particular artists was at an acceptable rate. That's probably the only way I would ever do that, just because I don't want to create that question.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
If you run an actual play that is a Deadlands product, even though every episode is free, can I still have a Patreon affiliated with my actual play? Like, hey, if you want to support me on Patreon, even though you don't have to, because you're going to get the content.
Boy, that's a really good question. And I understand now what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It seems sketch.
Right. Because I don't think anybody's going to come, but nobody's going to come after you, right? I mean, for example, there's no line drawn between Chris Hussey's actual plays and the Fear the Boot Patreon. Now obviously it's part of the Fear the Boot network and Fear the Boot actual play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People give Fear the Boot money to produce product, but we're not linking $1 to specific product, if you get what so it's very gray.
It is gray. And well, and for me, I guess the way I look at this is that I produce this content, and yes, I guess I'm still technically a host or co-host on Fear the Boot. I haven't been on in a few years. Dan has been gracious enough to allow my produced content to be on that feed, but I guess it's still kind of like my content in a sense. Letting my shit crash on his couch. Yeah, no, this podcast crashes on his server. So yeah, no, I get exactly what you're saying. Dan came over. It's apropos of nothing, but he came over and got me all set up, and I'm like, well, what do I owe you? And he's like, no, don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, kick ass. Yeah.
So,
I mean, if for some reason, if what I do, gets people to sample Fear the Boot who've never sampled Fear the Boot before and become patrons, well, hey, that's cool. Then I'm happy to raise some exposure for the Patreon that I personally don't benefit from, but I'm also okay with the fact that I don't personally benefit from it. The podcast actually has truly benefited me in the sense that I think it has opened some doors for me in regards to, I got to write a product for Pinnacle recently for their Lost Colony line that has not come out yet. And I think the fact that I had a reputation for the fact that I produce good Savage Worlds related content, I tout the goodness of Savage World as a product line, and it's a great game. But I think that has helped. I think that kind of has helped me in those respects.
Lost Colony, though, like I didn't know Lost Colony was even a thing anymore. Like, so you've got Deadlands Noir, right? You've got traditional Deadlands Weird West. You've got Deadlands post-apocalyptic Hell on Earth. And then you've got Deadlands in Space. Like, I thought Deadlands in Space was like Dead as Dillinger.
Well, and it really kind of was up until just a couple years ago when after they did the new Suede version of the rules, they quickly came out with the Suedified version of Lost Colony and everything was updated. And I had never got to play it when it was in its original incarnation, so I knew very little about it. But I backed the Kickstarter for Lost Colony because I thought I still like the idea. This still looks like it could be a lot of fun. And after reading through it and everything, it's like, yeah, this actually is kind of a neat setting, kind of a neat game.
I absolutely adore Savage Worlds. Some of the best games I've ever played have been Savage Worlds. The best Star Wars I've ever played at a table, RPG style, was Savage Worlds Star Wars. Savage Worlds is a delightful game. And I know that there are detractors out there that shit on Shaken and a variety of other things they don't like about it. But it's a delightful game, and it does almost anything except, and this is when the interview gets controversial, is high fantasy. I don't know what they're thinking with Pathfinder, right? I don't know what's going on with Savage Pathfinder. I think it's a terrible idea. Savage Worlds does not do high fantasy well. I've tried on a number of different occasions, but also it's an indication that second edition Pathfinder was a bad idea, because if it was doing well and it was getting market share, they wouldn't be going to Shane Hensley and saying, hey, let's do a project together so people remember what Pathfinder is.
Dude, that's some serious shade.
I know. And I love Pathfinder first edition.
Wow. I've literally played Pathfinder once. So like I know zero about the world, the storyline. I know it's like, essentially the D&D 3.75.
Yep.
And at least the first edition was. But that's like about it. But I backed it because I I think I disagree with you in regards to the doing high fantasy, but I haven't played enough Savage Worlds Fantasy to see if that's true, you know? And so I want to see how this works.
I could not agree with you more, and that I really am interested in seeing how it works. I have resisted backing it to wait and have it come out and then maybe pick it up at my FLGS. I know in the era of Kickstarter that is often a mistake because of all of the accoutrement that you get, but I'm more interested in how the hell are they going to do the big magic, right? The 7th, 8th, 9th level spells, and how are those going to be adjudicated with their magic system? I'll be very, very interested, because those spells don't exist in your traditional off-the-shelf Savage Worlds, and they don't exist in that rule book for a reason.
Mm-hmm. It will be interesting to see that, no doubt, because it is very square peg into a round hole sort of thing, in regards to something that is established like that, as opposed to, you know, creating your own fantasy campaign whole cloth with the rules. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're going to find out pretty soon, because the Kickstarter closed, and clearly, there's good interest because it made over 400K. You know, it's going to be neat to see how this does shake out.
No, I think a designer like Shane Hensley and a company like Pinnacle are in a perfect position right now. Like, I wouldn't want to be WotC. I wouldn't want to be Paizo. I wouldn't want to be one of the big companies that people expect to do big products that have a big name that you expect to see in Barnes & Noble. I would want to be somebody like Savage Worlds, where I have a popular enough game that you will find it at my FLGS, but I also have a loyal and rabid enough fan base that I can do multi-6-figure Kickstarters, have a great presence in conventions, have a great presence in stores, and not be a publicly traded company that has to serve its overlords who don't give a fuck about your game.
Yeah, you know, and there is a lot to say in regards to the modern game sensibilities. And I know, and I even agree with Dan on this. Dan has said this in the past, that the game's mechanics and rules should be indicative of the mood of the setting. And I'm paraphrasing a shit ton of what he said, but that is tying the rules to how the game is portrayed. Like that's a big thing. And I do agree with that. But yet there's a lot to be said for when you have a modern audience with a limited amount of time on their hands, and you have a system like Savage Worlds, which is so adaptable to a variety of things, that you can take that and with minimal adjustments, you can have the same people who sat down and gamed with you a couple weeks ago or a month ago, like the last time you got together and gamed. And hey, let's do another game, but let's do it this way this time. And without having to crack open a 300 plus page rule book and trying to figure that out, you can just say, okay, it's like this, and we're going to work these abilities this way, and powers work like this, and then go. It's neat.
I hope I'm wrong, right? Like, I hope, because the great thing about Savage Worlds, in my opinion, and they're in no way sponsoring this episode nor my show, but I mean, Shane, if you're listening, we would this episode brought to you by Savage Worlds, the latest edition in hardcover. It's brilliant, and Shaken no longer sucks. But but in all seriousness, though, the thing that's amazing about it is that you can plug modules in. So, and this is my brother and his, close group of friends that made this design. I take no credit for it, but they had a really very, very unique, and mostly my brother, a really cool way to use the Force and have a PowerPoint pool for your Force, just like your regular spells and a variety of other cool things you can do. And with Pathfinder, there may be a very cool high-level magic module that they've written that plugs right into the rules, and instead of having, 10 or 15 or 20 PowerPoints, I have like a pool of 60, and it's amazing. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong.
It amazes me that it does get the surprise or the support that it did. Savage Rifts. I actually have the itch to actually try Savage Rifts. I haven't, but because it's tied to Savage Worlds, yes.
Sure,
I said, I played Pathfinder once, but it's like, I don't need another fantasy game in my life. But yet at the same time, Savage Pathfinder, I might be able to get behind that. So it is a neat position to be in where you can have a game system like that, and you can attach either or adapt or become part of a well-known other IP's properties. I mean, I don't think we'll ever see like Savage D&D, but we would certainly see other. I wouldn't be surprised to see other.
And you know why you wouldn't see Savage D&D, Mr. Hussey? Because D&D doesn't need Savage Worlds. But do you know who did need Savage Worlds? Kevin Symbieta. He needed Savage Worlds. Do you know who else needs Savage Worlds? Paizo needs Savage Worlds. And I contend if they were commercially successful with second edition, this would not be happening. Again, I could be wrong, and I'm a negative Nelly. Chris, if people want to find you, they want to pursue you and cyberstalk you online and dig more into your intellectual properties and your creative endeavors, where do they find you?
The only social media that I hang out at now really with any sort of consistency is on Twitter. And on Twitter, I am at the Hussman. It's all one word. That's where you'll find me. If you want to check out the podcast, yes, you can go to ap.feartheboot.com. That's a very easy way to get there. But if you just want to narrow it down specifically to each one, I did do a URL which just redirects to both. And that would be youngandholt.com and then gunforhireap.com. And that's, of course, gun with two N's.
Because very cleverly, that is the name of, the investigator. Yeah, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. I do want to know why Twitter, though. I mean, isn't Twitter a cesspool of debate? I'm very confused why someone lives on Twitter these days, because it's so ugly.
Twitter is, yes, it is a burning kerosene doused dumpster fire of just awfulness. And it does take some time to really kind of curate your feed in being something that's worth going for. And even then, and I have curated mine quite a bit, but it is still at times things will pop up because Twitter's algorithm says that I need to see this, that I'll look at it and like, it brings that blood to boil. And, when you have to work hard to not engage in those kinds of things. But that said, you can find good communities and not to rah-rah Savage Worlds more than it needs to be. But the Savage Worlds community on Twitter, very supportive, very welcoming group. They're just a good group. And for the most part, your tabletop role-playing stuff, you can find good people on there. And there is good stuff to be had. And, I don't know, it's like life. Every place has assholes, and there certainly are plenty there as well. But yeah, there's, there's good people, but it takes time. It does take time to find it. That's for sure.
You spend a lot of time in the actual play space. And I have to tell you, I hate actual plays, for a lot of reasons. And I know that this is terrible to say as somebody who was for a very long time on the Fear the Boot Skies of Glass actual play.
Yeah.
But actual plays to me are like amateur pornography. I would rather just be doing it myself, and I very arrogantly think that oftentimes I would be doing it better. Now, sure. I very rarely say positive things about myself, and I'm very uncomfortable touting my skills as a storyteller, as a game master, but a lot of actual plays are just bad gaming, and it's brutal. It's brutal to listen to, and it's brutal to think that these are the things that are representing my hobby. And I know it's so snarky and judgy, but I would rather be fucking than watching someone else fuck.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think that's not, you're not wrong in that sense. I mean, I can't completely disagree with what you're saying, because as fun as it can be, or enjoyable, or whatever term you want to use, to listen to other people game, it doesn't replace the real thing. It doesn't. But at the same time, I think there is a lot to be gleaned from listening to APs. There's a shared sense of community that's there in the fact that this particular form of entertainment, and we'll talk about the quality of that entertainment here in a moment. But you have a community based around this Twitch stream, this AP of, sharing in the story as it's going on, or talking to the people involved in it. There's also, as a GM, there's so many things and ideas to mine from what you're listening to. I've gotten many ideas either for how to conduct myself at a table, how to spin a certain scenario, how to approach an encounter by listening to other people and how they do it, that there definitely is some value for that as well. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, I listen to it and you do a lot of judgment in that sense, like, I wouldn't have done it that way. Nope, they're totally doing that wrong. Or even to a certain extent, like I've listened to a few APs to try and learn the game. And this, I think, was where a lot of APs, and I think even mine included, fall into the category of failing to properly do that.
Game mechanics aren't entertaining.
Game mechanics aren't entertaining, and so many times players screw them up when they think they know what they're doing. In fact, I just edited an episode of Young and Holt where we did a social conflict, and I'm listening to stuff that we recorded 2 years ago, and I'm editing it now, and I'm editing like, oh, this is really good, this is good, this is good, and I realize, because I had forgotten this, we get to the end of the social conflict and go to figure out the results, and I realized I had been running the encounter wrong the entire time.
Oh, brutal.
And I'm thinking to myself as I'm editing this, I'm like, hey, this is actually pretty educational. I'm teaching people how to do this. And then I realized, oh, you dope, you ran the rules wrong, and granted, I wasn't too far off in the end, but at the same time, if someone was listening to that, they didn't necessarily get the proper education,
right,
in that regard.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect as well.
Mechanics would be an area where I would insist on a disclaimer. I'd be like, look, I'm a human being and I'm going to screw this up. So if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, and let me know. I'll try to be better next time.
Yep.
It's the same way with my lovemaking.
Exactly. Just give me another chance. Yeah. I swear I'll get it right this time, and I'll make it way more enjoyable. Yeah. I don't know. There's something about, and the good thing about actual plays is that there is so many to choose from. And of course, the bad thing about actual plays is that there's so many to choose from. It is redonkulously hard to find good actual plays. I mean, it is damn near impossible because there's so many out there, and we as gamers, and I've maintained this for a long time, we as gamers are probably the absolute worst at evangelizing the hobby and making people within our own greater circle aware of cool stuff.
Why do you say that?
Because it's true. It is so true that we do a lousy job of it for something that is so niche. We don't talk to each other about this kind of stuff. I mean, within our little circles, we can be like, hey, Mike, you got to check this out. This show is really, really cool, And okay, so there, I've kind of done my due diligence in that regard. I've made you aware of something cool that I've heard of. But telling other people and people that you don't know and making the social media posts about and touting the praises of something that you've seen that you like, it doesn't happen. Like, I just discovered an AP that I absolutely love. It's great. The guy, the production quality is fantastic. His approach to the rules and his story construction is great. And he's almost like 30 episodes into his actual play. And I had never heard of it up until like a month ago. And so he's been doing this for a while. I never even heard of the guy. It's that kind of stuff, or even certain products or websites or blogs where there's cool stuff, or even people to follow. We just do a really bad job of raising each other up.
Why do you think that is?
Making other people aware. Why do I think? I think it's for the same reason why people won't take the time to compliment other people on like the good job they do. It's easy. It's much easier to shit on someone. It's always easier to go negative on somebody or something, but we don't take the time to tell content creators that I like your stuff or you're doing a good job. And I'm not saying this in a sour grapes capacity. I'm not like soliciting for people to tell me if they like or hate my stuff, but it's just the desire to say something positive to someone about something they're doing. People don't do that generally anyway. It doesn't have to be about, RPGs. They just don't really do that very often. And it's something that really should be corrected, I think. People need to take that time to realize, oh, this person's producing something to make very little money on, or it's strictly a labor of love, but gosh, it sure is providing me a lot of entertainment. I should probably say, hey, you got some good shit here, buddy. They don't do that. People just don't do that. And I think that they need to do that. Your podcast, for example, I should have paid you a compliment of how good your podcast was a long time ago when I started listening to it.
Too kind.
And I should have been pimping it. But the thing was, like, I just, I started listening to some of the episodes and I realized, wow, this is actually really good. I need to tell more people about that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome. But and so I'm just as guilty as everybody else is. Knowing the smallish nature of what we are, despite the fact that there's so much content out there, we don't evangelize in that sense very well.
You and I were talking earlier, too, that about producing your actual plays. Kind of when we were offline, you had said something about doing Twitch. Are you doing any Twitch streaming?
Yes, I'm also on a Twitch stream. It's an every other Wednesday, and it's on the CFT RPG Twitch stream. And he's doing a Savage Worlds adaptation of Curse of Strahd. And he's combining that with the Rippers setting for Savage Worlds. So it's
delightful.
Cool. Yes, it is. It's delightful. And this is on the other side of what I was just bitching about, in the sense that I came in contact with these people and got involved because I was active on Twitter in this regard. And one of the people is behind a podcast that I follow, and one of the other players I knew from another Twitch stream that I watched and was a fan of. And we all just kind of got roped in together, and now we're kind of producing our own content in regards to this. It's enjoyable. It's fun. It's a neat mashup. I know nothing of Curse of Strahd, so this is like all new to me. It's a neat thing. I've also done a few others, like single type things. My most recent one was, and you'll appreciate this considering your age. Here's an example, by the way, of never hesitate to ask, because the worst that can happen is they can say no. So there was a con event that I wrote a number of years ago, which was sort of a sequel to the movie Better Off Dead. Okay. Like I wrote a con event, you got to play one of the characters from the movie and something happens and, you have to go do this. And the name of the adventure was called Better Off Undead. And so it's kind of obvious what probably happens in this adventure. And we played it at Fear the Con and everything. And it was great. But I was talking with Eric Ousley one day about it, and I had an idea. I said, what if we got some of the actors from the movie to try and play that game online on Twitch?
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And so the only one that I knew that was active was Diane Franklin, who played Monique, the French foreign exchange student, if you're from the movie.
Oh, I'm familiar.
Okay.
I have a spank bank, Chris. I got you.
You know what I'm talking about. I was able to message her. She didn't follow me, but I was able to still message her. And I said, hey, I'm sure you get this 1,000 times, but this is who I am. This is what I do. I have an idea for charity, because we want to do it for charity. I would like to pitch to you if you have a moment. So she messaged me back, gave me her email, and said, send me the details here. And I was like, holy shit, she actually answered back. I mean, that was like, I couldn't believe it. So I emailed it to her and I explained everything out, explained what it was, what we'd be doing. Here's a role-playing game. This is what a role-playing game is. I don't know if you know. And this is what you would be doing. And she messaged me back and she's like, hell yeah, I'm on board. Let's do this. I was like, fucking hey, I didn't think that this was actually going to happen. And then I said, do you think anybody else from the movie might be interested? Is there anybody else that we could get? And she emailed me. We kept communicating. She's like, she knew that Cusack couldn't do it. She wanted to get, and now his name escapes me, but the guy who played Booger in Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That guy. He was unavailable.
If that guy doesn't play D&D every weekend, then something's wrong with the universe.
Curtis Armstrong, that's his name. Yeah, he clearly, he's got to. But she had reached out to him, and then she reached out to the actress who played Beth, and she decided like she was unavailable, she couldn't do it. But who she did get though was Savage Steve Holland, the guy who actually wrote and directed the flippin' movie.
Wow.
Yeah. So suddenly now I've got one of the actors and the guy who wrote it, and they're going to play in a game, and neither one of them had ever played RPGs before. And they're going to play in a game for a sequel adventure that I wrote in his friggin' universe. So no pressure. Don't screw this up at all, Chris. And we worked out a date, and Eric was one of the other players, and then he got Maddie to round out our party of 4, and then we ran it as an event on Eric's Twitch stream, and we did it for charity, and we raised money for Toys for Tots because, Christmas was the theme in the original movie. It was kind of fun. They had a great time, and I knew that they had a great time because Steve had to leave to catch a flight, but after the Twitch stream was done, Diane hung out afterwards, and we had a conversation for about a half an hour in regards to everything. And so she was a very genuine person, just very gracious, and and this was their first game that they had ever played. And they really got into it, and it was great. It all came from just having an idea and not being afraid to ask. So there you go. There's your lesson for today, kids.
And this is why you need to get yourself a Rodecaster Pro. You can do all sorts of great. You could do your gun sound effects. You could do your intro. Nice. It's pretty slick. I want to play around with it for gaming in general. Years ago, they did an episode of Fear the Boot about using music in-game for setting tone and stuff. So I want to get some external speakers for this so I can do exactly that kind of shit, right? Clashing swords awesome. And explosions, and I know it sounds dumb, but I'm totally into it.
No, it sounds amazing, and that's another reason why I think it's better. Like now is like a true golden age in a lot of ways for the things that you can do and what you can bring to the table.
I don't want to say publishing, but the self-production in terms of being able to use music, video, art, monitors, the technology is truly, truly amazing. And as a supplement to hobby, I think it's great, but this barrier, right? The technological barrier between us, I don't like it. It feels plastic and ugly. It's like McDonald's. I mean, it's fine, but it's not as good for me.
Yeah, no, it is. It's still limiting. It certainly has gotten better in the past year by leaps and bounds, but it changes the way in which, it certainly has changed the way in which I game. I get very demonstrative. I definitely stand up when I'm running stuff, and it's part of how I do. And I can't do that. And a lot of times, when you're running games, some people, they don't engage in video, so they just engage audio only. So now you've taken eye contact out of the situation, so you have to become a bit more descriptive, and it can be really, really difficult. And I even with because I got into the whole paid GM gig as well, and even a couple of the things that I've done with that, when you don't have people who are there in video but only audio, you have no idea if they're even paying attention to what you're talking about.
I'm sorry. Paid GMing? So
sorry, I told you there was I do too many things.
I am also a veteran whore and did paid game mastering, but I want to drill down to your paid game mastering experience. So, I mean, just from the beginning, how does this start? What is paid GMing? So
I found out about this. And this goes back to the marketing stuff that we had mentioned about evangelizing and making awareness. The company that I got involved in, they were wise and decided to sponsor a Twitch stream, which then led me to this sounds like a really interesting thing. I'm going to check these guys out. Checked it out, was able to sign up, build my profile, put that out there. And then you basically hang your, hang your flag or whatever, or your sign, or, and I've had people message me, hey, I'm interested in doing this, da-da-da. You have a conversation with them. Maybe you come to terms. Maybe you don't. Maybe the conversation just dead ends. But, if you're active enough, you get tapped to do certain things. I was lucky enough to get involved in being with a group that did a couple of corporate events. So a company comes to them, says we want to do this for whether it's corporate team building or just a corporate blowing off steam activity. And then we get the parameters to work in, and you go and you run an event. And so I've done a couple of those. I did a dude's birthday, which was honestly was a fantastic experience running a paid game for this guy's birthday. And they had a great time. They never played. Maybe like one of the players I think had played, but everyone else is new, and you have your time frame and you just go. And yeah.
What is this company called that you...
The company that I signed up and made a profile for is called startplaying.games. And there's another one that I can't remember their name offhand, but I have also signed up on there as well. Yeah. And the Start Playing is where I've gotten into a number of gigs. That's for all the paid ones that I've done. I've done through there. And it's an interesting experience. It is strange, the idea of getting paid to do this when it's something that you do for free with other people. But for some individuals, definitely in the corporate world, but I can see that it would be difficult to try and find, so there are some areas where you might just not be able to find any gamers, or you don't want to go trolling, like various looking for games or looking for group forums or whatever, because you don't know what you're going to find. And so if you're putting some money out there, there's a certain level of expectation of the quality that you're going to get.
I would do team building, corporate gig, one shots every day. Fucking Monday through Friday, like that would be my job, is that every day I run a game for a group of corporate people who may or may not be into it.
And some are, some aren't, and it's almost like any other table. You can tell who's really into it and who's not. So it's very akin to, say, a con event where, maybe some people, like, this is their first event of the con. And so, like, yeah, they're there. But for other people, like, they spent too much time up last night and they're hungover at the table, so they're not really into it or whatever, So you get that level of involvement and engagement. But it does feel more jobbish in that sense. Like when I run a session for my regular group, whatever that group may be, if it falls flat on its face, I feel bad, but I don't feel that bad. It's like, just didn't quite work. But if I go to a con where people have paid money for tickets to sit down at a table, or if I get one of these paid gigs, the amount of pressure that I put on myself is just insane. It's like these people paid money to have a good time, and they're relying on you to provide the impetus of that good time. So don't fuck it up. They take it very seriously, especially with stuff like Fear the Con. Like I remember when I first heard that there were people coming from overseas to Fear the Con, and one of them had signed up, I think, for one of my events, and it was nerve wracking because it's like this dude traveled thousands of miles to sit at a table, and because of he heard me on a podcast, that's ridiculous.
Kind of Skrilla, what kind of money are you pulling down doing this game master whoring?
It varies, and I think because you can kind of set your own rates. Like the corporate things, those are a set rate, and so a lot of it depends on what the corporation wants to play. So the spectrum on there has varied. But like the birthday one that I did, I think my rate was I feel weird marking myself up too much.
No, hold on a second. Wait. Hold on. You have spent the better part of 4 decades refining a skill in a hobby. As far as I'm concerned, that's well above journeyman. I'm not going to put more pressure on you, but dude, I call bullshit. If you weren't good at it, people wouldn't come back to your table. If you weren't good at it, people wouldn't pay you to do it. If you weren't good at it, people wouldn't listen to your show. If you weren't good at it, right, that you wouldn't have a career in the hobby. So I call bullshit. You are good at it, so fuck off.
Okay. All right, fair. I know the birthday one, I think I got paid my rate, which was, gosh, I don't remember what it was. I want to say it was between $30 or $50 or something like that. So like I said, I don't want to overprice myself. There are definitely people who have higher rates, and I think there are some people who have lower rates. it was somewhere in that range. And then they graciously tipped me after the fact, outside of it, because the birthday boy in this sense was very, very happy. And he really had a good time,
right.
which made for a weird focus in that particular instance, because when you're at a table, everybody's got to get the spotlight, or that's what you try and accomplish as a GM. But yet you got the guy who's the focus of the fact that they're all here. It's his birthday. And so you want to try and give him more of a spotlight because it's the dude's birthday. So it's his day, man. He's the freaking star here. And so that was a weird thing for me to do. And again, so you say doing this for the better part of 4 decades, but yet here's a brand new experience. I've never had to do that before. And I just did this in 2020 after all this time. It's the first time I've ever had that thing where it's like, this is just for him, so he needs special attention, so I don't know. That was weird, man. I do enjoy it. I probably should pursue it now that I'm currently unemployed. I probably should pursue it a little bit more than I do, but it is fun. And it introduces you to just new things about it, new aspects. The hobby continues to evolve and change. It's cool.
Chris Hussey, you have one of the most important qualities in a person, and that is true, sincere love for the thing that you do. And I have to say, personally, I am envious of your positivity and the perspective with which you view the hobby, because I'm not that guy, and so I'm definitely envious of that. I really am.
Well, I appreciate that. It is, not to hurt myself, patting myself on the back, but it is a manner and a behavior which has taken time to cultivate. It's very easy to, and I certainly was in a space where you could be negative often, but I found being enthusiastic and being positive and just, even if I don't necessarily agree with somebody's doing, or I think what they've got is bullshit, still being happy about the fact that they're in the hobby and they're doing something cool with the hobby, it's worth celebrating, It's a neat thing.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I really appreciate it. Can you give us that Twitter handle one more time?
I absolutely can. It is the Hussman, just at all one word, TheHussman. That's me.
Well, Chris, hopefully someday soon we'll be able to sit at the same table.
We have not gamed yet.
I know, which is weird because you've gamed with my brother in the aforementioned Better Off Undead game. My older brother Bob was in that game. Yeah, I remember.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
You bet. Absolutely.
Why We Game is a production of the Influence Foundation. All rights reserved. Audio editing by Brodor. Music by Owen Godwin.